Welcome back. Since the beginning of the year, we have witnessed the relentlessness of the Nigerian military in the fight against the Boko Haram insurgents. Sadly, pockets of attacks in the northeast have threatened to ruin the gains made. But as we said, the military is relentless. Recently, we heard the Nigerian Army Special Forces Team B, 7th Division Garrison, conducted a fight patrol in which they reportedly cleared Boko Haram terrorist hideouts in Lawin Maleri, Matiri, Bulaka and Algeri villages. 63 people held captive by the insurgents were rescued and 5 of the insurgents were killed. The army also said that they, in a separate operation, demystified the insurgent spiritual power base at the Alagano forest in Borno State. And based on a tip-off, conducted a clearance operation around Alagano forest general area, destroying Boko Haram camps at Musa, Ariwuzumari, Kalgamari, Mesene, Joba, Yajiwa and Sansan. Lord Richards, David Richards that is no stranger to fighting insurgency or terrorists. The 64-year-old retired British Army officer has served in Germany, Northern Ireland, commanded forces in East Timor and in Sierra Leone, where his action, without official sanctioning, protected the capital Freetown from rebel attacks during the country's civil war. Lord Richards has also served with NATO as a Major General and commanded the International Security Assistance Force elements in southern Afghanistan as a Lieutenant General. As I said, he's well experienced in fighting terror and insurgency. Recently, he was in the country to give a lecture at the 40th Memorial of former Nigerian Head of State, General Murtala Mohammed. He spoke to us about the General, what he stood for, and how Nigeria can tackle insurgency.
Well, I know Nigeria quite well from previous visits. And actually, my father fought alongside Nigerian troops in Burma in the Second World War. So I grew up to a degree on tales of West African troops and Nigerian troops in particular. But I also fought alongside them in Sierra Leone. So I feel I know Nigeria quite well, and I, without being, I hope, patronizing for 1 minute, I have a great affection for Nigerians. They're very bubbly, cheerful, decent people, and it's great to be back here.
Oh, that's good to know. I'd like to take up from what you mentioned earlier about fighting alongside Nigeria in Sierra Leone. You decidedly pushed rebels out of Freetown, the capital of Sierra Leone. Now, thinking about your part in Sierra Leone at that point, would you say that military might is a very important part of fighting insurgency?
Yes, I would like to say that it was a big team effort. I played quite a small part and probably got more sort of accolade than I think I deserved. The most critical influence in Sierra Leone back in '99 and 2000 actually was Nigeria leading the ECOMOG force. The British did play a useful role, but if it hadn't been for Nigeria, actually Sierra Leone would have fallen yet again to the RUF. And I'm one of those few people out in the West, really, that understand the debt that Sierra Leone owes Nigeria, and I never lose an opportunity to say it, so I'm using this as yet another one of those opportunities. But there's no doubt that military muscle, sadly, is sometimes required. It's only useful if it's placed within a political framework, so that there's a reason for the use of military power. But there are people in this world, by no means just here in Nigeria, in the northeast of Nigeria, for example, the extremism you're fighting and suffering from there, but right round the globe, we have a new scourge of extremism. And part of the solution within a longer-term political and economic framework is the use of armed forces, democratically accountable to democratically elected governments, wherever that can be. But it's a necessary evil, if you like, to use military muscle to root them out so people can live their lives in freedom and in the way they wish.
Besides military muscle, what would you say, how do you think that rebel groups and insurgents should be handled?
Well, it depends. Each insurgency is slightly different. And I think the first thing one's got to ask is there a legitimate basis to their grievances? In the case of the sort of extremism that we're discussing now, in the northeast of your country, in Syria where ISIS is operating, for example, in parts of Iraq, in Somalia, in parts of Libya, the legitimacy of those groups, I think, is very questionable. What we have got to be careful of is that their exploits don't act as a lure to other people who actually, in a normal state of affairs, wouldn't be attracted to such groups. And therefore there has to be a political basis to one's operation. But I would argue that the first thing to do is to use military muscle to get rid of them, to remove them as a lure, as an incentive to potentially millions of other people around the world who otherwise wouldn't be drawn to them. But as long as they exist, there's a risk that because they know no better, or for whatever reason, they're lured and incentivized into these groups, thereby allowing them to grow and threaten us more and more. So you need to deal with them, but it's got to be within a political framework. But each political framework is going to be different depending which conflict you're looking at. And I've just been involved in something to do with Somalia, quite different to the situation pertaining here in West Africa, which is again quite different to what's happening in Syria. But the principles are normally the same.
Here in Nigeria, the federal government has put a lot of funds, resources in the fight against the Boko Haram insurgents. And there's also been support coming from international arena, but it seems as if the group, their might is persistent. What would you say what could be behind this?
Well, first of all, militarily, be under no illusion, and I've done a bit of this sort of thing, it's never easy. It looks to the untrained eye as pretty straightforward, but it's never the case. So what you're confronting in Boko Haram is challenging, but they are most certainly defeatable. And I think one has to be a bit patient. One has to, in the case of many armies, reorientate to fight a different type of war. I mean, do you know it took 30 years for the British Army to defeat the IRA in Ireland? It's taken 15 years in Afghanistan to get where we've got to today, and many people, and I would be one of them, say it's unfinished business. So I think it would be wrong to think that in these 5 to 6 years that you have been grappling with Boko Haram, that it's suddenly going to be solved. It will take time. I think you can have confidence you will win this battle, and I'm, for one, convinced that more international support is needed to help you do that, particularly on the logistics side, at the higher levels, air, aviation, intelligence gathering. While the West and other allies of yours are helping, they can do more. But they are also, those countries, very focused on other conflicts. As I said, this is a scourge affecting large parts of the world. So I would like to see world leaders coming together in the sort of statesman-like way that I was saying that President Mohammed, I think, would have applauded back in the 70s, to come together to say this is a sort of world war and we've got to deal with it in that sort of way, progressively, all together, and cede command and, if necessary, authority to someone else in order to do it. So it's a scale of a problem, not just in Nigeria, but widely across the world, that requires really massive resources and massive leadership. And I don't think people really quite get that yet.
What would you say is the role of the citizens in the fight against insurgency?
Well, I think as long as the citizens of a nation agree with the government's policy, which I am very clear, as I've talked to many people on this trip to Nigeria, and I've been here before, is the case. No one likes what is happening up there, and everybody wants to see the end of it. So the first and most important thing, and I don't need to say this in some respect, is to support your president and the government, who are very clear that what has got to be done. And then as a soldier, I think most important that you support and give understanding to your armed forces, because they're the people that are risking their lives and in some cases sadly dying on behalf of the rest of society. And it's very, very important that they know that they have the backing of the people they're seeking to protect.
All right, let's quickly get to the reason why you are here. Did you ever meet General Multari Mohammed?
No, I never met the general. I'm not that old. I was in the army in Northern Ireland when he was assassinated. And because I always took an interest in politics and African politics as a result of my degree course, even then I was aware of the impact he'd had, not just in Africa, but actually increasingly, even in that short time, more globally. So I never had the privilege of meeting him, but I know a little bit about him, and he's obviously a very great man, and the fact that he'd been a soldier sort of adds affinity.
All right, well, the little bit you know about him, would you say you have enough knowledge about the legacy he left for Nigeria, and would you say that has impacted upon the upbuilding of Nigeria?
I think so. I mean, just basic things like, moving the capital to Abuja. I mean, do not underestimate the moral courage required to do that. His integrity and his determination to root out corruption, all these things that indeed President Buhari today is also seeking to do, I think you can put down as part of General Mohammed's legacy. And they're very important things if in a very complex world you're to take the people with you in a journey that for all countries is very difficult today.
Are there things you think the rest of the world could learn from what he represented while he was alive?
Well, I think the world, and I spoke about this today, is crying out for leadership, for statesmanship, and he was clearly in that mould. Sadly, he didn't govern for long enough for him perhaps to reach the level of impact that I'm sure he would have done. But it's that type of leadership, the statesmanship, that I think we so badly need today. And I believe if he was still alive today, he would be having a huge impact, not only in Nigeria, but regionally, but I think globally, because we all need that sort of leader.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
We have indeed come to the end of the program. And do remember to tell us what you think about any of today's topics. The addresses are on your screen. I am Amarachi Ubani. I'll see you next time.